Hi, I'm Folium Creations, and today we're going to make this phone case out of this slab of oak. However, as it turns out, making your own phone case from scratch is quite the endeavor. So this is going to be a two-part video series where we go all the way from taking measurements and sketching up a 3D CAD model all the way to a finished phone case. It was quite the learning experience. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope that you enjoy following along as I work. Now, let's make something. This first step serves two purposes. The first being the obvious one, getting all the required measurements from the phone. The second, to understand how the shapes and features relate to each other. This will be helpful both in making the CAD drawing and to plan the order of operations. And as a side effect, it's also a natural time to think about the design and visualize it in your head. The camera housing required some extra mental bandwidth to figure out. It was obvious that there was a right-angled triangle in there, but what I'm interested in are the outer dimensions of the camera housing, so I had to work my way from the inside and out. Had a hard time deciding whether or not to go in-depth on the CAD process. Finally decided against. Already knew that this needed to be a two-parter, and I didn't want to make the suffering longer than necessary. The process is pretty straightforward, although it differs quite a bit from 3D modeling in applications such as Blender. Having experience in 3D modeling sure helps though. And I found out that you could change the navigation scheme to the same as Blender. That made me feel even more at home. In some ways I would say that parametric modeling is simpler, in others it's harder. Blender don't care about constraints in the same way. I would say that there's a high risk that I will find excuses to make future projects on the CNC, just to learn even more about FreeCAD. some of the features added here are for the schematics and not just for the CNC job. But just as important, having complete drawings with usable measurements is required when making something that needs to fit with something else. Bring our attention to this old slab of oak. First of all, I have no idea how old it is or where it's originally from. When one of my neighbors was cleaning out their shed, they asked if I wanted it, and I said yes. Who wouldn't? They've been laying in that shed since before they moved in, so I would argue it qualifies to be referred to as reclaimed. As you can see, oak is tough. Sure, this chainsaw is battery powered, but it took quite a while to get through. I'm removing this piece to get a more manageable and somewhat cleaner edge, so it'll be easier for me to re-saw it on the bandsaw. On the last cut, the battery died, so my trusty Japanese saw and some elbow grease had to finish the cut. And now it's time to further refine the edges, working our way towards clean and somewhat perpendicular edges. Laying down some thick double-sided tape to hold the piece in place as I cut the first reference edge. I'm using a piece of fiberboard that I know has two parallel edges to use as a guide towards the fence. And then one of the hardest things to do in a workshop, getting the protective plastic off the double-sided tape. Then I place the piece of wood and give it the obligatory "that'll hold" slabs. On the bandsaw, I place the fence so that I can cut off enough material to get closer to the end dimensions while leaving room for eventual, inevitable, blade travel. My bandsaw is quite small, so I have to take it slow to avoid the blade slipping on the rollers. But it chugs along just fine if you give it time. The blade managed to travel a bit more than I was comfortable with, so I made another shallow pass to straighten out the cut. checking how level my table is as a reference and comparing it to the workpiece. Move the work table over, because it's time for planing. I'm using a laminated fiberboard and some double-sided tape to help me get a clean, straight top planed. The rollers on my planer has a tendency to push the last piece of the wood down, causing a dimple when passing. This also helps mitigating this. I really need a jointer, but until I get one, this is a workable solution.
Planing is actually kind of meditative. You pass the piece of wood through a couple of times, you take it out, you look at it, you touch the wood some, and you think about the end piece, and then you plane it some more. And now that we have a neat piece of oak, it's time to head back to the bandsaw for some additional resawing. It might look scary that I'm waiting so long to get the wood push block to push the wood all the way through, but it's actually going really slow in real time. Now I cut off the ends and square them off on the table saw. Instead of measuring out and marking all my cuts, I do them one after another, because I try to avoid any compounding errors. This, however, does not stop me from accidentally making one of my cuts on the wrong side of the mark line.
And then I place all the parts back on the laminated fiberboard to run them all through the planer again. Apparently the slight out of squareness I had was more pronounced when placing them all beside each other, so a few more passes through the planer will flatten them out nicely. Some more cutting on the table saw. Never try to catch things close to a running blade.
might be wondering, why the small parts, and why are they placed across the grain? Well, if there's something 90s shampoo commercials taught me, is that the last thing you want
to split ends.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more.
Finally, it's time for glue up. I'm smearing the top of the laminated surface with a mixture of beeswax and paraffin oil to stop any glue from adhering to the fiberboard. It's also a perfect finish choice, but we're still far away from that step.
So this will be the end of part one. We've come a long way. Went all the way from a huge slab of oak to a smaller piece of a slab of oak, and slowly worked our way to a workable piece that we could slowly turn into 4 blanks. That will be CNC'd later at my brother's workshop, because he has a CNC over there, and a mill and other things that was needed to finish this project. So a bit of a collab that will happen in the next part. There's probably some questions, like for example, why did you make 4 blanks if you're just going to make 1 case? Well, that will become evident in the next part, so I hope you stay tuned for that. There's also another surprise happening in the next part, so I hope you stay tuned for that. But until then, I'll see ya. Or you'll see me, because I won't be able to see you because you're just a camera. But yeah.